Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the podcast. Hopefully, you're not too nervous because I might want to make it more awkward. That's just my tendency. That's all it is.
No worries, do your worst.
Oh, well, careful what you ask for. Apparently, there's not too many working sound people, at least that are active. They tend to get booked up pretty well on multiple sets. Is that? Do you think that's accurate? Is that the case?
Yeah, that's been the case as far as I can tell. It seems like there's not a ton of us and there's a lot of projects. So for things like Winterville, it seems like there's a lot of demand, which, it's awesome for us. I don't know why there aren't more because I love it, but I'll take the win.
What is it about sound that you love?
There's a lot of different things. I think the thing that originally was the coolest to me is like there's just so much I can hear that I couldn't normally here. So there's just a lot of moments that it's like, wow, that's really amazing that I can like hear that. I've heard people's heartbeats. I've heard, the bugs in ways that doesn't make sense, like to the regular ear. A lot of those kinds of things. There's also just a lot of room for creativity, how to place mics, where you need to stand, things like that.
You kind of feel like you're listening in on the unseen world that most people are missing out on.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So go ahead and just tell me how you got started, how long you got started, and what was your first project like?
So my background's actually in studio art, so a very different kind of direction. And it was 2020, and I was just kind of hopping on whatever there was, trying to get started in film. And I was on this project, and they said, will you do sound? And I was like, I'd never done that before. I'd done a little bit of radio, that was it. And they, on the project, they're like, we'll teach you. And I was like, okay. And I loved it. So that kind of was the beginning of that.
How long ago was that?
That was like summer 2020.
Oh, okay. So not terribly long ago. Was that like in a college phase?
So I was out of college, but it was like a small, just like for fun project. We were all wearing masks. Like it was that
Right. Yeah,
time.
I remember that. That was an interesting time. That was an interesting time. That's all. I think that set. That honestly, that felt like what the people thought the year 2000 would end up being like. You know what I mean? It's he had all these.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I really maybe it's like it's going to be like one of those where in hindsight archaeologists going to reterm time to where like we redefine like AD and BC around like the death of Christ and whatnot. And we're going to redefine the year 2000 like in 2000 years around at the actual COVID date of 2020.
I could see that. Yeah, it definitely feels very before and after. I think people talk like that too.
It really is because it was a milestone for everybody because everybody's lives just got either stopped or it accelerated. Like for me, it was the at the time I was still doing it, but it was in construction and everyone else was shut down. But for some reason, construction stayed open because it was like a necessary, it was a what was the term? Essential worker, is that what it was? Something like that.
Right.
And so actually business picked up because a lot of everybody went home and they're like, oh, there's some projects that we need done.
Right. Yeah.
But I also noticed a lot of people decided to actually try to pursue some more artistic endeavors that they ended up always wanting to do because they had the time to at least explore and do it. And it sounds like it's kind of the case for you. Am I more or less accurate?
So I had been kind of trying to work my way onto set before then.
Mm.
But so I wouldn't say necessarily that. But it was just kind of so the first like set out of college was at the end of 2019, and of course that's like very poor timing.
Mm.
I got on one more and then everything shut down. I was actually doing video editing at the time for online classes, which was like one of those things that was like a very fortunate kind of job situation. It was part time. I was working from home, and so I could hop on set more when there were ones, which
Okay.
was when.
Has your work both been, how much of it is indie work, and then do you do also like larger production union jobs as well?
So I'm not at this moment in the union. I'd be happy to do larger production union work. There just hasn't been a lot of it right now. And since I'm not in the union, that's kind of a complicated situation. But a lot of the work I've done has been indie work. I have had some like commercial and docu work as well. And I mean, I just love doing sound, so I'd be happy to do like any of those different kinds of jobs. It's just been a lot of low budget indie work.
Okay. Have you thought? Well, you would. What would make you want to do union, or give you the pressure to maybe sign up and actually try to go more down that route? Is there anything appealing about that?
There's a lot of things that are appealing about that. I mean, of course, there's like the very like logistical things like health insurance, but then there's also just having bigger productions. A lot of those are the bigger productions, and it's great to be on the small ones. There's a lot to learn, but there's also a lot of benefit to being on those bigger ones. There are like more protections, which is also great. I haven't been, I actually was on a union, non-union production as art department, but I haven't been on one as sound. So I would love to have that experience.
Mm. So sound is what you mainly do for indie productions.
Yeah, sound is what I do. Like now it's really the only thing I do.
Have you been asked to do like more art department things, but considering your background, is this something you'd like to do?
Um, I did a lot of art department things when I was first starting out.
Mm.
And for a variety of reasons, it's kind of since like last year I've mostly dropped that and only been doing sound. But I've done two features in art department and like a few other things as well.
Okay, but do you prefer sound? It seems like why is that?
So it's kind of a weird way to put it, but like doing sound, like the actual job itself, like I love doing the job and I don't really get frustrated with anything within the realm of like this is what we do for sound. With art department, there were certain things that it's like I just didn't enjoy doing as much. And there's nothing about that department like there's a lot in art department that is really amazing and incredible and like moments that were just like wow this is so cool I made this, but there are also some things that frustrated me personally. And so I kind of hit the point where I was like, well, if there's things within the job that are frustrating me in this area but not in this one, I should gravitate to the one that I feel that way about.
Are there any examples that pop in your mind?
I think the easiest thing is sometimes production with the vision. I feel like I really love to make things look real. And
Mm.
sometimes production wants them to look like picture perfect. And that really confused me. So I didn't really enjoy that, which is like a specific, like, kind of preference. It's very like my background's in studio art. So a lot of that's like you're alone doing art by yourself. You have a lot of agency over like what you're doing
Mm.
versus like working in art department. It is a lot more of like, you're getting word from production from maybe two, three people above you of what they're looking for. And I think I just didn't enjoy that as much.
Yeah, it felt more like a not necessarily politics on set, but just like a dysfunction of like the hierarchy of command.
Not necessarily dysfunction, just sometimes it's like, uh, you know, I was like, I didn't agree with that. And it's like, it doesn't matter. It's not my vision. But there was elements of that that was frustrating. So
Is that why you think sound maybe is a little bit more appealing to you? Because art is, at least in the art department, it's kind of like, okay, is this to the liking of the person that I need to fulfill their vision for, as opposed to sound, which is very, although yes, it's creative, but on set it's very technical. It's very, did you get it or did you not, and did everything go smoothly? And so um, it's very A to Z. There's steps. You know where all those steps are, where the different points of failure for your equipment is, and so if something's going to go wrong or something does go wrong, you're able to diagnose that, and follow the cookie crumb trail that leads you to the problem. As opposed to art department, you could put your all into it, and then suddenly, oh well, we're gonna go this direction, and then or maybe it's could you tweak it this way. You put a little bit more of your, I suppose, creative soul into art, where the sound is much more of about getting the job done and doing the job very well. Am I off the mark there a bit?
I honestly haven't thought about that. So I think that sound is very creative, but in a different way. So it's a lot more of like, where are we going to hide this mic pack? Like, how can we place this so that it'll sound good? So it still feels creative to me, but in a very different kind of sense. It's more of like
Kind of like
working with
theater.
what.
Kind of like theater.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like I feel like it's a lot more working with what's there sometimes. And I also think with art department, there a big element for me was I did a lot of work off of set, so I'd be before or behind the production, and I just didn't like that as much. With sound, like even if you're at the cart, kind of away from the project, you're still like on set when things are filming, and
Mm.
I just enjoy that more.
You got a little
Um,
bit closer to the action with sound.
yeah, and I still do art actually. Like I just had a show a couple months ago, but
What kind of show?
I do mixed media collage.
Oh, it makes me okay. I saw your Instagram actually. Yeah, it was there was a lot of very um, well, it's not just collagey, but like there's a different. It's kind of abstract in some ways. The type of art that you like to go for. Mm.
Yeah, I do a little bit of everything, but yeah, a lot of it is kind of building from the ground up with a lot of it's paper that I found, so book pages, things like that.
Mm. Well, I mean, being when you're on set and you're kind of like the fly on the wall. I talked to Rachel about this a little bit. What's it like to be the fly on the wall on the set? Because normally sound is the first one to actually be ready, and then you're hearing the mics going off of like everybody who's lobbed up, and maybe the boom that's near the other parts of the cast or something like that that's set up, and then suddenly you're just waiting, and then you're watching everyone else trying to get ready. What's that like?
I mean, there's a lot of just kind of watching to see where to be, I would say. Especially like if like I'm boom mopping or like I'm doing everything. There is a certain amount I would say of discretion too. Like sometimes I do hear things that's like, there's like one time that one of the actors got a personal call and I like turned off the line because I was like, this is not something she needs me to hear.
Hmm.
So there is sometimes like that, those kinds of moments. I do think sometimes it makes me get like pretty close with the actors because they are kind of aware of that. And I do my best to try to make sure when they're not working, like the lines are off or like, we're not listening or they know that they're on or show them where to mute the pack. I'm not exactly sure if that was your question, but
I know you're good. Well, because sound tends to Rachel once told me, and then you can maybe piggyback off of this is ideally sound likes to try to bid to be the first person on set, so that way they can kind of claim dibs to their particular area, assuming they don't get like kicked out for like camera department or something like that. Because sound is, for better or worse, no matter how artistic it is, it ends up being sometimes an afterthought, tragically, which is it shouldn't be that way, but it ends up being the case, more often than not. It seems like to me. Um, uh, when you first show up on set and then you're starting to set up your equipment, what are you looking for to where, in relation to where they're going to start shooting, where you like to end up setting your equipment up? So one, you're not in the way, but you also have a good location to be able to, be efficient.
somewhere that's pretty close but is kind of out of the way, I would say is the biggest thing. And it kind of depends on like if I'm running like the mixing board like off of like a pack or if I'm running it like if it's all me and I have like my back brace and I'm running it that way or if it's running more off of a cart, that's kind of a different situation. If I'm running it like by myself kind of that way, then like it's a little bit less important, I would say, in terms of location of setup, because I'll have everything with me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so somewhere that's like pretty close, kind of within like if I can within kind of seeing what's going on set so I can be aware of it, but not like in the way, obviously. Like if there's like a bunch of doorways that people are coming in and out of or something like that, I want to make sure I'm to the side of that.
When you're on set, what tends to be the bane of your existence when it comes to getting a good, clean recording?
Um, I mean, a lot of that comes down to locations. I
I
would
know
say,
equipment's a big one, like the refrigerator in the
yeah,
background.
yeah. And like it is really good. A lot of people won't have sound on location scout, but to have us on it is good because then we can at least make production aware of those things. Yeah, I'd say trains are a big problem. Um,
Especially in the Midwest.
yeah, there's certain cities it's like, all right, there's probably going to be a lot of trains. Like trains, airplanes, those kinds of things. And it's just like sometimes there's nothing you can do. Like I was on a 48-hour and we had trains, weed whackers, planes, and then the location we were on had an alarm going off every 6 seconds and we couldn't turn it off. And it was a 48-hour project. So there's just nothing, there's
How'd you guys
nothing to
get
be done.
around that one?
Editing and trying to get the lines in as much as possible. We did some wild lines of it, but it's just there's not a lot to be done with that.
Well,
Like,
you were like inside of like a warehouse, or like what was the describe to me the location of that one?
we were in like a church.
A
Um,
church.
I think like we turned off the AC and then the building got mad. It was very strange.
I
But
mean, who wants cold air anyway? Like for real? Like
yeah,
who wants that?
it's not good for audio, so we don't need it.
On set, also, when does a sound operator need to keep an eye out? What do they need? What do you guys end up having to keep an eye out for in order to make sure that like clean audio ends up happening, other than like these random occurrences that happen to be like passerby, you know?
Yeah. So a lot of it is if I can get a look at costumes before um kind of having to mic them right away. So I'll kind of be keeping an eye on like what actors are wearing, things like that. So a lot of times I'll have to mic people quickly and I'll have kind of a sense of how I want to mic them before we get to that moment.
Mm.
Um, Looking for things like, does the camera have a fan? Are the lights making noise? And then being aware of that to maybe get some extra room tone. Um, Watching where lighting setups are and things like that. But of course, there's like, it's kind of become like a meme that like, sound is set and then a floppy comes in. So there's always things like that happen. Looking at frame line and seeing like how close I can get with a boom,
Mm.
stuff like that.
When is it more optimal to use a boom versus a lav mic?
Actually, a lot of the time it's more optimal, but I'd say like with close-ups, especially like if it's a wide shot, the boom most of the time is not going to be super helpful. Like there are different situations, but a lot of times if it's a close-up, the boom's going to be the better way to go.
What was the most sketchy situation or the most creative solution to a situation you've had to be able to actually get good sound for a particular shot?
Oh, I feel like a lot of times plant mics are kind of those good solutions. Um,
Mm.
Trying to think of some good ones. I've hung mics from the ceiling before, instead of like having it on the boom. So that's always fun. Um,
How many rolls of gaff tape do you go through?
Not a lot,
Not a lot,
actually.
really. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I've bought any new gaff tape. Like usually it's only a little bit, and that's for either doing something with plant mics or hanging fernies, something like that. Um, I'm trying to think of what my best plant mic is. That's what I usually take pictures of on set.
They always end up like
Uh,
looking like something really jimmy rigged and rednecked, and it's
oh yeah.
sometimes it's like a creative abomination when go to create or like plant something that's like it's working, but uh,
Hmm.
there's a thing that's coming to my mind. It's like the code is completely broken, but it's still working, so don't touch it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, this was more for fun, but we plant mic'd a doll once. Let's see, we had in a towel.
You put a
There's
lav
always
in a
all
towel.
yeah, like bedside tables. So I feel like that's pretty typical. I hung one from like the kind of the mirror in the car.
Hmm.
Um, and that one was pretty cool because it was like we were trying to get the sound of something on the seat of the car, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, just put one on an oven before. There's a lot of fun plant mics.
What was a movie that you watched when that first set off the inception of like I'd like to be a part of this?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. Um, I feel like I did a little bit of stuff with film when I was a kid. And then kind of my friend who did a lot of film things moved away, and then I didn't for years. But I'd say, ironically, probably the thing I can think of the most was like I watched the old Percy Jackson movie, and I was really upset that it didn't follow the book, and I was like, I think I could do a better job.
So it wasn't like some glorious emotional cinematic moment. It was just you being pissed off as a book lover.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I do have some of those like glorious cinematic moments later, but I would say that's probably kind of the oldest like thing I can think of. And I do have like I'd written notes in one of my copies of the book of like where to split up episodes and things like that. So I did have like plans in the works. Um,
For like
but
readapting Percy Jackson? Is that
yeah.
that's I want to read that fan fiction, honestly.
Well, I
How do
didn't
you
get
feel about
very
Harry
far.
Potter though? Are you also a Potterhead?
I liked it. I'm not as much of a diehard fan, so I was a little more like
Okay.
okay with the movies than I think a lot of my friends were. I mean, there are like a few things that I think I was confused as to why they did or didn't add it, but I was
Hmm.
never like as much of a diehard fan as Percy Jackson.
Yeah, it wasn't you weren't crazy. You didn't have a problem with Dumbledore yelling in the Goblet of Fire versus conversely with the book.
I actually didn't notice until people pointed it out.
I didn't
But I watched
either.
this a
I
lot
only read the
when I
first book, honestly. I only read the first book because I was deciding. I was a movie guy, but I'm like, okay, these books are a big deal. Should I watch? Should I enjoy this story as a book experience, or should I enjoy it as a movie experience? Because I wasn't allowed to watch Harry Potter as a kid. It was like one of those situations. So it's like I couldn't. So I got older, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read these books, and see what's happening. And then I read the first one, and I'm like, oh, this is a great kids book. And the movie's gonna be great, and it was. But it was really interesting because it was one of the few books I'd seen adapted to screen. And I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't they put that in? Why didn't they put that in? Because before that it was just I only read The Hobbit. That was
um,
eventually adapted and then strung out into three movies, and I have my own feelings about that. But that's a whole different podcast for a whole different story. um, tell me about when you're first getting involved in the indie scene, because first off, where are you based out of?
I am based out of Yellow Springs, but I kind of work
That's
all
closer
over
to
the place.
Columbus than Dayton, right? Or is it between? No, Dayton. Yellow Springs is near Dayton, right?
It's like 30 minutes from Dayton, like 50 minutes from Columbus, and like an hour and 15 from Cincinnati. So it's close and not close to everywhere.
Oh, okay. So how much of your work and projects end up being split between? Like, what's the proportions between Columbus and Cincinnati that you get approached for?
I'd say way more in Cincinnati at this time. I've had a few in Columbus, but yeah, I've had way more in Cincinnati.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, because everyone needs sound, obviously, and since there's not a lot of sound, I wonder if that's telling of how large or small the crowd in Columbus is. Curiously, because Cincinnati, I think, it's a larger city, but it's not. I think Columbus actually has a little bit more to offer. It seems like in terms of like a city, in terms of how it goes, and they have more tax credits. I think.
I mean, it's hard for me to say exactly. It seems like a lot of it just has to do with like who I've talked to more and like who I've worked with and what's happening in the city and their needs and all those kinds of things. I had a little bit more work in Columbus when I was first starting, and it seems like I might have a little bit more than I have in the past few years now, but
Mm,
it just kind of depends.
okay. Um, have you? When did you first start? Well, what was the last project you said no to, and why?
Oh my gosh, I have to think about that.
Do you
Um,
often end up saying no to projects?
Not super often. I'd say for the most part, sometimes I've said no to kind of the free projects because I don't have time or it's just a lot of driving or something like that.
Gotcha.
I'd say that's more likely. But of course, like if I'm double booked, then that's like I'll say no to the project.
Oh, okay, so it's mostly scheduling related.
I'd say mostly scheduling. Sometimes too, it's like, you know, something like that, that it's like it's unpaid and I just don't have time or energy for it, even if there isn't a direct conflict.
Mm. Have you had any bad experiences on set? It seems like most of the case, like we end up more often than not end up being with people that are very agreeable to be with, at least creatively. But there's always those one-offs. Everyone has that one story.
I mean, I think that it's hard pressed to find someone who hasn't. Like obviously I'm still here. A lot of times things are situational. And I will say like often when I am on a rough set, like there are many times that it's like the production's not exactly working the way that is super conducive to a easy flow environment, I guess is the best way to say it. But the crew is amazing. So often, even in those situations, there are things to kind of get out of it.
Mm. It's just, you're talking about like a silver lining. You know, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
the world's burning down, but we're chill. You know,
Oh,
we're
yeah,
chill.
definitely. But no, I think, unfortunately, I think it's hard to find a person who hasn't had at least one rough set. But, it happens.
Are there any aspects that you think of sound that you think a director would benefit from knowing, particularly as a director?
Definitely. I think it's weirdly just kind of the prep that like a lot of us do, like going through this like script and looking to see what red flags are. I definitely try to, of course, like sometimes you have IFB, but like beyond that, to let directors sometimes hear what's going on when I can. But I'd say a lot of that is kind of like knowing to bring us on location scout, knowing some of the prep that we do, and then also knowing some of the limits of what can be done in post. I think a lot of people assume that a lot more is easy to do than it is.
Do you do any
And
post work?
not really anymore. I definitely would like to do maybe edit a one or two things just to kind of keep that headspace more in mind. But like, I did a lot of post production for online classes when I was kind of 2019, 2020. And it's a great work, but it's not the space for me.
You're tired of fixing other people's problems.
I like being in the thick of it.
Okay. Um, how has being a sound artist changed the way you hear everyday life?
Oh my gosh. A lot. I definitely notice a lot more things. So I'll be like out and about and I'm like, what's that kind of thing? I definitely feel like I'm a lot more aware of like when things are super loud. So like I have
Kind of like a
professional
dog when
grade.
he sees a squirrel. Like what?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Especially when I'm with other mixers. I have like professional grade earplugs now and I use them like pretty frequently, I would say, because I'm just like a lot more aware of that. It's yeah, definitely. I'd say especially too when I've been on set for a lot of days and I'll like come home, I hear everything. It's kind of a problem sometimes.
Do you just like throw on noise canceling headphones in order to just decompress?
I actually like can't do noise canceling headphones.
Really?
Um, yeah, like I they make my ears hurt.
They make your ears hurt. I've never heard that before.
I thought I was crazy, and then I Googled it, and it's apparently happens to a lot of people. So it's,
Is it
I
particularly
guess,
sound
not.
people or just a random subsect of statistical anomaly?
Well, I did ask another sound person after I realized that, and he said it happens to him as well. But like, there is like a certain number of people who just like can't do noise canceling headphones, which I've heard they're awesome. So like, I kind of would like to have that experience, but yeah, it just doesn't work for me.
I've never heard of that before. That's interesting. Um, Tell me a little bit about your experience when it comes to being able to adapt to a bad scenario that's happening on set.
Um, so I mean, it depends a little bit on the bad scenario. But I feel like there's kind of a range of that from like things that are unsafe to like problems with sound. When something's unsafe, like I have a lot of things in place. Like I have like a high vis vest in my bag, things like that, just to keep aware. And especially if it's unsafe for someone who isn't me, like I try to slow things down as much as possible. And if it's truly unsafe, then I will like go talk to production and make whatever's happening stop. So
Mm.
there's like that kind of level of issues on set. And then there's things like, mics going down, stuff like that. Of course, like troubleshooting is, if you don't know what's wrong, you don't know what's wrong. And that takes a little bit of time. But like kind of being aware of what issues can happen and having backups is a lot of how I'll navigate those situations. And then also like especially when working with like a great team, there are times that I can talk to other people on the team, so talk to camera department or someone else who's on set who's aware of what's going on and say, hey, like I'm having issues with like we don't have any PAs and this is a really tough run. Like, could you maybe grab me some water or something like that? Um,
Hmm.
so there are things like that too. It just kind of depends on the situation, but I think to me, like every situation that's kind of rough is approaching it as like, you know, am I safe? Is everyone else safe? Is kind of the first thing, and dealing with that because that's the most important thing.
Do you film a
Um,
lot of sketchy scenarios?
no, I wouldn't say a lot, but I have been in a few that I was like, this wasn't good. Um,
Can you give me an example? You don't have to
um,
name names, but if you do want to name names, I will take the views. I'm just saying, like it's fine.
they like filming on a really busy road without high vis. I
No,
would
okay.
say it's like not good. And there are also things at which like production is aware and they are keeping you safe. So there are times it's like we've been in a neighborhood that is like a little bit less nice and everyone has expensive gear and production will be like, we know this, we're gonna walk
Hmm.
you to your car or something like that. So there are things like that that happen on set.
Okay. What's the largest crew of sound people that you've had to work with in one unit on a production?
I'd say three people. Um
Okay. How would the roles divvied up between those people? Like I would think like sound or like sound operator, mixer, and then maybe there's some type of in between role. But the I asked because it's a little bit of a mystery to me. Although Rachel did enlighten me a little bit on it about the different roles. The sound mixer is basically the DJ of the set, and the you got the boom operator, which is pretty self-explanatory. But then there's other like weird in betweeners that are kind of float between the main heads of the department. And can you enlighten me a little bit more about what about those roles makes everything much more efficient?
So I haven't worked a lot with a three-person team. Mostly I've worked with a two-person team, just like for full disclosure. But I would say that's a pretty good description of it. So the mixer is mostly doing kind of the mix and spending time on that. Then boom operator, a lot of boom operating is looking for kind of where to be and what to get kind of like what your best sound is going to be watching camera a lot. With boom operating, you're spending a lot of time with camera department figuring out where the shot is. And then sound utility is usually doing a lot of the miking. And I've heard a lot of the kind of go between things. So it is like kind of divided into those positions. And when you think about being on like a huge production and needing to mic people very quickly, maybe a lot of people very quickly, it helps to have like a lot more person power in that. There's been a lot of times I've been like a one person band and like having a second person has cut down the time, sometimes three times as much,
Hmm.
just because there is a lot of that mental um, just like problem solving that you have to do.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like the scenario of like two horses. Like they can actually carry more weight than they can individually.
Yeah, I would say that as well. And it is nice like to have a second person or third person to like problem solve with. That helps a lot sometimes, especially if there's like technical issues. So, for example, I was on a project, I had a mic pack go down, and like I didn't know if that was the frequency, I didn't know if it was the mic line, I didn't know if there's something wrong with the pack itself. And I'm troubleshooting trying to do that myself, and I didn't have a second person to mic anyone else.
Hmm.
Um, so that helps a lot in those situations. There's also some situations where it really helps to have two booms, especially like something like a stairwell. You can have one at the top, one at the bottom. So there's a lot
Okay.
of good scenarios for that.
The in the example you have the mic at the top and you have the mic at the bottom. But you're getting reverb obviously if you have a character going up through those steps. You know,
Mhm.
and are there any other scenarios that come to your mind where you had to become creative with the locations of the mic that weren't involved with a lav?
Oh, absolutely. I was just on a project and we decided to do two booms, and it was just like kind of a dining room scene and had one of us kind of focused on one person, one focused on another person, just because we could do that.
Hmm.
So there's, situations kind of like that. Then there's also things like I just read a script for a one shot, and like that's definitely something it's good to have multiple people just because that is a one shot, and there's probably going to need to be picking up sound from one place to another. So there's just like a lot of places it can be creative, if there is the person power for it and the desire to be creative, which I think most of us in film really want to be creative most of the time.
Sure. Yeah. How can a producer, make things the most efficient for the process of sound when it comes to setting up the shot as well as the whole day and the scheduling of it?
I mean, there's a lot of very specific things like kind of keeping us in the loop. So sides are good to have, knowing the shot list, things like that. I think I've been on a lot of projects that people kind of forget that we might need those things, and they do
Mm.
help. Like information is key, and a lot of times camera, especially like a seasoned like camera department, will be really good about giving us information as well. But like if it's something like that, that's like giving us sides, giving us information about the location, those kinds of things. It really does simplify things if like production gives that to sound department. So like we're not figuring it out on the fly
Mm.
or need to get it from someone else.
Okay. What about lav mics? I'm curious because sometimes those things just pop off and they have a mind of their own. How do you, especially for example, like there was one person who was on set, and it was a very physically intensive scene, and he kept sweating, and that just the lav mic as well as like some of the makeup actually end up popping off over and over again. What have been some creative solutions that you found in order to make things actually work?
So alcohol pads are good for sticking things down. Sometimes if it makes sense, I'll stick the mic to like a piece of clothing instead of skin if that will work. For the pack itself, like if things are really wet, like it's raining, people will have like non-lubricated condoms you can throw the pack in.
Oh, I forgot
Um,
about the condoms. Yeah, there was one guy who got on like he had a whole like package of condoms, and he had this funny story where he put the condoms, in his bag, and he wasn't thinking about it. But one time in a completely different non-film context, the bag spilled over in front of people who had no idea about like his job or anything, and they just all fell out, and they just started clapping for him and everything. It was just like it was like one of those the awkward scenarios that you find like Modern Family.
yeah, definitely.
Um, but sorry, I cut you off. Yeah,
No,
go.
you're good. I'd say that's a good solution for like the pack itself. I mean, it depends a little bit on what they have from wardrobe and what the situation is, and like ideally too, if that's something that maybe gets figured out more in advance, which you probably wouldn't with someone being sweaty. Like sound working with wardrobe is also an option to come up with some new creative things.
Okay. What's the most difficult situation with wardrobe that you've had to overcome?
My gosh, wife beaters are not good. I would say on the
Can't
whole,
hide anything in those things.
yeah. Of course, like something like a bikini is a little bit challenging. I've actually a few times worked with other sound mixers and we've like brought our most complicated to mic things and tried to mic each other. Um, so I think some
As
of
like
the
a
hardest,
challenge or something?
yeah, and to like keep up, you know, just kind of like keep up our skills and like, work on those challenging things when we're not on the clock. But yeah, I'd say like those are a couple of them, like when there's not really a place to hide the mic pack. Especially like there are ways to get like specialized ursa packs, things like that, but if it's like a low budget or like I don't know what the costume is, that's not necessarily something I can do. um yeah, there's
Mm.
I think probably one of the hardest was like, and I actually ended up doing a plant mic, but the actor was shirtless and spilling things all over him.
Hmm.
And so I actually mic'd the table because that was like, there's really nothing to be done there. Um,
Okay.
like I could
Do you
have
have
maybe
any?
mic'd.
Oh, sorry, you cut out right there.
Oh, I was like, I could have potentially mic'd his hair, but he was spilling so much on him that I was like, this is probably not a situation in which the mic will kind of be able to be totally safe.
Have you had to replace equipment because of something that happened on set?
Yeah, I've a couple of times. And ideally a lot of those, if it's like something that's happened with productions, and then I'll go through loss and damages. But I did have one time that I think what happened was the mic was in someone's pocket and he was slamming into a bunch of fake blood and I didn't know.
Mm.
And luckily we only lost like the clip on the back. But I think like, you know, that could have been a lot worse. So that's why it's really important, especially with like fake blood, to let sound know.
Mm. Why is it that you think that, you know, sound does get neglected sometimes on set when it comes to informing them or just keeping them in the loop?
I think a lot of times people just don't understand it. Like camera's very kind of obvious, like you're watching the picture. With sound, I think it's one of those things that sometimes people forget about until they notice it's not good. And
Do you
like, you
think
know,
directors don't care as much?
I think sometimes they just don't know as much. A lot of the directors, I think, are coming from a camera background or kind of a general background. And I think that sometimes there's just like a lack of interest for some reason, which I don't understand because I love sound. But I think that, you know, things are structured kind of that way in general. Like you kind of know from a lot of projects like producer, director, director of photography. And so sometimes the emphasis is put in that place. I don't think it necessarily for a lot of people comes from a bad place. It's just like a lack of understanding.
Mm.
And like I've directed once, and the best advice I feel like I got was like pick a good team and listen to them.
Mm.
And so it's always very confusing to me when people aren't leaning on all the departments as, you know, the experts in their field. But I think sometimes you know, it's very instant gratification with what you can see with camera. With sound, sometimes it's a little bit less like that.
That's true. I mean, maybe if they were wearing headsets and directly connected to like those sweet mics that you got hooked up and everything was just in high definition, then suddenly that's maybe that's what needs to change. Every director, just standard from now on, needs to wear headsets connected to the sound equipment.
They do sometimes. I think that there's too, like with sound editing, a lot of just misunderstandings. I just got asked recently. We had a heater going on, and they said you have a multi-track recorder, so doesn't that mean that the heater will be on a different track? And I was like, no, that's not how sound works. But like that would be great. So I think there's just a lot of like lack of understanding sometimes too, which when I'm on set and there's time and people are interested, I try to explain things or let them listen as much as I can, because like anyone in production knowing more about sound, I think is good for everyone. And I try to listen when they talk about their different areas, because me knowing more about other areas of production is really good for sound as well. So
Hmm.
I think, you know, we're a team, we have to be able to support each other.
What's the most favorite project that you've been on so far, or the project at least that you're most proud of?
That I'm most proud of. Oh, that's hard. I have a few. There is one recently called Grease Monkey. I think you've talked with Ben McLean.
Oh
And
yeah, I talked with a couple of people about that. That name keeps getting thrown up. I guess I'm gonna have to go see this movie now.
that was a lot of fun. There's a lot on there that was really fun. I was just on one. I always have fun when there's a lot of like kind of sound I have to capture that's not necessarily with lines. So I was just on a winter film that there weren't a lot of lines, but it was a lot of like sound of movement and breathing and things like that. So I had a lot of fun with that. Um, I don't know, that's hard. Uh, it's really
What
hard.
I'm trying to get you into trouble, obviously. You know, I want to get you to play favorites, and then suddenly you're gonna get ostracized from the community. You know,
I've got a few coming up too that I'm pretty excited about for a lot of reasons. So I don't know. It's like
can
it's
you talk
hard to
about
do.
those? Are you allowed to?
Like a little bit. Like there's a couple I'm on the production team. There's and a lot of different kind of directions I guess I'd say. I'll like but they all seem like they're going to be really fun. And it's like it's also I would say with all those coming up, because I've been involved so early in the project, it's like when there are technical issues, it's very exciting because like there's time to solve them. So there's one that I think that really we're like as a sound team, we're going to be spending a lot of time with costumes, trying to figure out with between like both of our teams how to fix things. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Okay. When do you think is the most ideal time to start bringing sound people in for their assessment and their analysis of things into pre-production?
Um, I mean that's hard. I would say very early on. Um, like I feel like pretty soon after DP, because the DP is going to have to do a lot of work with like shot listing and things like that. But I'd say pretty soon after that. Um,
You
just
think you should
because
have locations nailed down first and then try to bring in a sound person to see like how well they're going to be able to fix things, or maybe how often do you think locations should be considered when it comes to sound? Because there's
oh,
always a
all
trade-off. There's always a trade-off between all these different departments, you know. They're like, well, if we give this department what we want, then well, then maybe we can compensate a little bit in the edit, and there's always, that dynamic going on.
I mean, I think it's always good to bring sound on those kind of location scouts. I think it's always good to bring art on those location scouts. Like to me, it's like there are those trade-offs, and I think hard pressed to find a director that doesn't kind of value some departments a little bit more because they're coming from a background. But like it's kind of hard. Like when I directed, I was coming from a sound background, so I value that more than other things. But it's important for production to know that information so they can make those decisions. At least I think. I think more information is always good, and bringing those experts on those location scouts is going to give them the information about what they might be sacrificing.
Hmm. Does that any examples that come to mind for that? Because there's with sound, it's they're obviously sometimes they're an afterthought. Like I don't want this whole podcast to be like, well, sound's important too. Let's give them some compassion where they're always getting stepped on and everything, and their cords are getting tangled. Nah, and it's just because that is sort of the way it is. I think it's just interesting to be able to see behind the scenes of what's actually going through the sound person's mind when it comes to sometimes being an afterthought, but not necessarily criticizing the people who bring them on, because like you said, there's different. Everyone has their own different background and whatnot, but there's a lot of different elements. When it comes to bringing on a sound person, if you don't know sound, you know, and there's like one time, we had a mic go down on a set for a short production that was a while ago, but we ended up having to improv on the spot in order to actually get something shot for the day. But we didn't give that consideration to the sound and their equipment and everything. Um, so even though we didn't, it bit us in the butt that we didn't give more consideration to sound, because now every other department has to figure out, oh, something happened because we didn't pay enough attention to them, and now we have to compensate in all of our other departments.
Right. I mean, I think that there is kind of the scenarios too, and there's several directors that I've worked with who have asked me a lot of questions, and I've worked with two in particular who said that they can tell by my expression if the take is usable, which is pretty amazing. And like, I think that that shows a lot about them as directors. Um, so it is like, I've worked with a lot of people who are trying to learn from every department to become the best director possible. And I think that those are really amazing situations. I've also worked with other crew members who, even if production isn't paying attention to sound, they will make sure that me, or if there's multiple of us in the department, are taken care of as much as possible. Sometimes that's just like making sure that we have water. Sometimes that's,
That speaking
checking
sounds like a
in.
very specific experience that you're referring to.
I mean, there's been a few, like, I think it's so easy on set to forget to drink water. So,
Yeah.
kind of keeping each other in mind. But it's also sometimes like there was one time in particular, there were two of us in sound, and the way that the shot was going to work and what we were given time to do, neither of us were happy with it. We were both very frustrated with the situation, and the DP saw what was going on, looked at the two of us and said, let's change the shot, let's do this. And we're like, okay, we can make this work. And sometimes it's just having that team that's aware of your needs as well, even if production isn't kind of aware of what sound needs to do.
Okay. Well, my brother was. I'm curious about this because my brother was he was the boom op on one of my shorts that I did a while ago, as well as a larger project. And I did neglect his needs a little bit, and so I can kind of empathize a little bit with your situation because one time he brought me aside. He's like, "Dude, you have to give me some new equipment here. Like I'm dying. Like I think a broomstick would be better than what you gave me for this pole over here because like part of the thing snapped off at the top, the connector
Oh
piece,
no.
and it was in the middle of the day. It was working fine. So there was no problems beforehand, and then he ended up like taping the mic to the pole that he had, and but that the sound of the pole was traveling up through the mic in order to actually be able to, and a lot of the takes weren't usable, and everybody just wants to not be frustrated. Like it doesn't even have to be a good movie. Just don't make it a bad set experience at the very very least.
I mean, I think that, every set, of course, like if I've worked with people before, there's a little more information going in, but most sets where it's like a new production team, it's kind of like how much are they willing to take time for sound? And so, like, how many takes can we redo? Things like that. I will say with boom pole specifically, I had a like very rough beginner boom pole that I kept using for way too long, and I just bought a new one this year, and it is night and day. But those nice boom poles are expensive, so it is like
What makes them
definitely an
so
investment.
expensive?
What they're made of, I would say, like how specialized they are. Like sound equipment is very expensive, and that is something that production definitely does not know. I've run into so many scenarios where they get very confused about that, or they're like, a weekend goes by and they're like, "Why don't you have more lavaliers now?" And I was like, "Do you not understand those are like hard to get and expensive?" Well, not they're not that hard to get, but not something that would just materialize. Um,
Right, you can't just go to Walmart and get
so
yourself a lav mic. I mean, you could maybe, I think, but it's not a good
yeah,
one.
like my boom pole is like carbon fiber, and it's intercabled, and it's nice. It's like very much nicer than the one that I had been using, which now is it would probably make a good spear, but like so it does really those they do make a difference, especially because that is something that as a boom operator you're holding, and it's heavy, and mine's weighted now, and it's so much nicer. So those
Mm.
those things do make a lot of difference in terms of personal like wear and tear, I would say.
Yeah, it's not just the sound quality; it's also like the ergonomics of it. Because if you're holding a boom pole up, and then suddenly, if it's heavily weighted on one end, I've never thought about that. I've actually never thought about that.
No, like my back brace is like one of the best purchases I've made because it both keeps the bag so I can see it visibly, but it also is like it turns something that would be kind of heavily over my shoulder into basically something that feels like a lighter backpack. Um,
Okay. Um, what's the best technical purchase you've made? Not just ergonomical, but what was the best purchase you made that improved the quality of the sound?
I just started. I have two electrosonic lavaliers now, and those are definitely night and day. I'd say beyond that, I was running off of a H4n Pro, and then got like an Zoom F8, and that is a huge difference. So I'd say those two jumps were both like very substantial. The
What was the
electrosonics
difference between the two of them?
the Zoom H4n is a lot of like what you'll see on kind of those smaller beginner sets. It's got like basically space for two lines, very similar to that Tascam that people usually have on a lot of those sets. Like the Zoom F8 actually, I can do like more like actual mixing. It has like it can run up to 8 lines. It's got faders. Like it's definitely much more of a professional piece of equipment, and I was told before I bought it that I was going to love it. It would change my life. And that was 100% true.
Is
So,
there anything else you need to upgrade?
oh my gosh, there's always upgrades. Like, I could just buy equipment forever. I actually would like to upgrade that Zoom F8 to a Sound Devices 633. I would love to have more electrosonic lavaliers. I need to get a cardioid mic. Like, there's a whole wish list. I think most people, I would say, in probably camera and sound, always have that ongoing gear list that just, it's never ending.
Hmm. Well, Rachel, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Is there anything as a director? Well, I haven't directed anything in a hot minute. I'm more of a writer at the moment. But is there anything that you think as a director that if I were to know beforehand, specifically related to sound, going into production, that you think might either make things efficient or make the project end up having a much higher quality product going into the production?
I mean, I'd say kind of like I said before, bringing sound on early is a good thing, both to look for red flags in the script, for things that could be difficult, but also like coming on that location scout. Um, and difficult includes everything from wardrobe to location to shot list, like any of those things, or just asking technical questions that you might not have thought of. I'd say that's important. Having at least two people in sound is very helpful. Um, I've talked to a few mixers who like actively don't want to work often as a one person band anymore, just because you're doing multiple jobs.
Mm.
And there are situations where that makes sense, like docus often and things like that. But on something like a narrative, like having two people is incredibly helpful and a time saver. Um, and then like even if you like for some reason don't have sound on locations out, keeping that on mind, like listening for airplanes, listening for trains, listening for if there's like if it's very much in the wilderness and you're shooting overnight, the bug sounds are going to change when you hit the morning. Just being aware of those things, so at least even if you need to have it like that, um, you can know and be prepared for that.
Well, I appreciate the advice. I will take those to heart, and I will do my best to at least not forget them. And if not, if I do forget them, I at least have this podcast to go back to. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave with the audience?
Oh my gosh. Um, I think that's the biggest thing for me, like learning through film is like there's some really incredible teams out there and people to work with. And I've really learned a lot from them and I've learned a lot working together. And there's a lot of knowledge um, like on a film set most of the time. You get together all these people who are incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly talented. And sometimes it's just nice to kind of sit back and be like, I can learn a lot from this situation, while also bringing my all to it, which is a pretty cool situation to be in.
Well, Rachel, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.